Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of the band Maroon 5, but I'm now a registered therapist, author, and mental health advocate. With me, as always, is my co-host, Duck Maillard. How you doing, Duck?
Hey, buddy. I am mustachioed and ready to rumble.
You've got almost like a very...
It's almost Ron Burgundy.
Yeah. Well, the stash is definitely in the Ron Burgundy realm, but your overall look, you look... like Biff, just
from Back to the Future?
Well, not him specifically, but just the name connotes, just this sort of strapping collegiate man.
Well, I mean, you know, the sad reality of my life is that I am subject to the whimsy of my auditions and things like that. So yesterday I had to audition for something where I had to look a little more clean cut. I can't give away what it is because I'm still hoping to get the job. But whatever you think I look like, that's probably what I was auditioning for.
I hadn't even thought about that. That's how much I have my head in my own, world. Yeah. A lot of the time it's like, oh yeah, you're an actor. Every day you're a different character.
You know what? Like, jokes aside, when I go to get my hair cut, it's like this 20-minute where I go, well, I kind of need to leave it long because sometimes I play like a surfer dude, but I need it short because I want to play a lawyer. And so this, like, the hairdressers hate me because I'm so wishy-washy with, like, we don't want to go too short because I need to do that. But it's like I'll shave into a mustache for an audition, and then I'll audition for two other things, and I'll be pinned for one of those two things, so I can't shave the mustache for the next audition, so then I have to keep it, and it ends up being like a month where I'll have like the last few podcasts I've had a beard because I grew the beard in, but now I got a call back for something that I did a month ago with the mustache, so back to the mustache. So yeah, it's hard to keep your individuality and your identity a little bit when you're trying to constantly look the part. But
that was going to be my question. It's like, do you lose yourself in the process of all that? Does it feel like you're constantly living in a character?
You know, we talked about it on other podcasts where if you walk into the room and go, I'll be whatever you want me to be, you want me, you won't get the job. But if you walk in there and go, this is who I am, and you make the casting people go, well, that's not how we saw the character, but man, Brian came in and was such a strong personality and such a strong choice. Maybe that's how it should be. You want to create there's advice to actors that say, create a problem. Go in there and they say, the role is 55 to 60, overweight, a slob. And I walk in there, clean cut, and I'm not 55 to 60. I'm slightly younger. And, and maybe you change their opinion of what that character and that role can be. You've done a great thing, and you've created, like the greatest example is Hurley on Lost. There was no character for an overweight guy like that. But he walked in the room and people were like, we love this guy. We've got to find something for him. We've got to create a role for him. And he was, obviously on that show for 6 seasons. So the goal is to kind of to have some of your individuality come through. That being said, sometimes the role is what the role is. If I'm playing a cop, this is the look for the cop. I can't go in there with stubble and a longish hair and a t-shirt. I've got to dress the part. So yeah, there is a little bit of each day I'm putting on a new costume and trying to look the part. And if it happens to stick around and have residual effects for the podcast, then there you go. So today your co-host is a cop. So bring it.
That reminds me, just recently I did an online event where I was on a panel talking about performance. And, I was talking about my past and the things that became challenging for me in performing every night after night for weeks and months and years. And there was another drummer on the panel. And then there was this wonderful person named Paula Thompson. I've done a few panels with her. She's a psychologist. She's got a PhD, but her background is in dance. She works with performers, with their mental health and in terms of just enduring everything that goes with that lifestyle. And she made a statement in the course of that panel where she said, you have to remember every time that we get on stage, we're lying.
Right.
And I didn't know how to relate to that statement. And I came to agree to a certain extent in that when I was suffering and I had to go out on stage and pretend like I was okay, to somehow get through the set and put on a show. At that point, I was lying. I was not myself, my authentic self in that moment. But before that, playing the drums on stage with my band was me 100%. Like that was so free and fun. And I don't know if I agree that it was like, but I understand what she's saying, whether you're a dancer or you're an actor, any sort of performer where you're putting on a performance of a certain emotional connection that you're trying to make on the piece that you're presenting. To a certain extent, you're denying yourself in that moment and connecting to this piece, this thing that is this. And the challenge is, of course, to find your own humanity within that and to, as you're describing, bring yourself into that part. But I imagine that must be the biggest challenge for an actor more than any other kind of performer, because you are literally inhabiting a person.
Yeah. The best, I would say the best actors, to quantify it, but the most transformative actors are the ones who can seemingly bring a humanity to a character that is completely unlike them. You know, I mean, I think we've talked about it before, that there is a certain level of movie star quality, that charisma that's, you know, you can't kind of quantify it, that as long as Brad Pitt shows up on screen, you're watching. You know, it isn't necessarily the deep emotional connection he has to the character. It's just that whatever that unspoken thing. But an actor who is known for those transformations, a Daniel Day-Lewis, a Meryl Streep, you know, people who disappear into character and every single one feels true and feels real and feels lived in. That's a special skill that I don't think everybody has, you know, and being able to, even if it isn't something that lives inside you, even if you don't have the cold, you know, calculating stare of a serial killer, you know, but Anthony Hopkins made you believe that Hannibal Lecter, that must have been inside him somewhere there, because it was so real and honest. And that's the trick. You know, I think if you can pull that off and make people really believe it, then yeah, I think you are putting on a show, you are lying, but that's a sort of a rough translation of what we do.
Yeah, it did sound harsh the way she put that. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
That's a stark way to sort of, you know, to describe what the work of an artist is.
Less of a lie and more of an enhancement. You know, like we said, it's you plus 20%. You know, I remember being a kid and hearing my mom on the phone and being like, why does her voice sound so...
Right.
She's like giving it that extra juice. And, you know, my wife does it too. She interviews people, and my son makes fun of her because, you know, she'll be like, all right, I'm going to start this interview. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to have you. And like, that's not who she is. But when she's on, she's on plus 20%, you know?
Yeah. Well, I'm just realizing as I'm listening to you talk that, you know, us being these two creative types talking about craft and performance is in such stark contrast to the guests that we have on the show today.
Yeah.
And
although he does have he certainly has a presentational and big bombastic style. I mean, the beginning of this podcast is him kind of hitting us with his philosophies and stuff. It's cool.
That is true. But we do get into it to a certain extent, you know, just the difference between creative types and, you know, not to stereotype too much, but, you know, business types or suits.
Business type, yeah.
So it is, I suppose, apropos that we're establishing ourselves at this point as the artist types, right?
We're drawing a line in the sand, yeah. We are not the sharks.
Yeah, so the guest on today's episode is Bill Faeth. He's an impressive guy. He's had a lot of success in his own business and now as a coach, teaching other people to have the kind of success that he's had. He's an entrepreneur. He's had many companies that have been successful. At one point, he describes exiting, I think he said 19
of them, yeah. To think about how many businesses you'd have to have exited 19 of them and still have others left over.
Right. Mostly real estate. It sounds like he's done a lot of real estate, and in particular, the what are they called?
Short-term rental world, yeah.
Right.
Airbnb type thing.
Having success in that, he's transitioned into speaking and coaching on the topic of how to have success in this world. So a lot of his content online and in what he does when he appears and speaks and helps other people is purely about the business of the short-term rentals and helping people establish, you know, and find success and wealth in that world. However, you and I we're pleased with this conversation in that he was willing to open up and talk about his personal life, to be as vulnerable as somebody like his type A type of personality, strong businessman can be. And so I thought this was a great conversation, and I'm excited for you guys to listen to it.
Yeah, we talk about, one of the things we talk about, and you and I have talked about, is for any coaches, any speaker, anybody who's leading a seminar, is finding that balance between boiling it down to its most basic elements of like, here are the 3 things that you have to do to become a real estate mogul like me, versus the individual attention that each person might need. Some people might need a kick in the pants. Some people might need a tender, loving hand on their shoulder. And I imagine that you're in a similar position, not just as a speaker and as a, leading seminars, but as a therapist. The client who needs you to say, all right, that's enough feeling sorry for yourself. Now it's time to get up off your butt and do something, versus the person that says, hey, you're being too hard on yourself. You need to cut yourself some slack and have some grace, right? I mean, is that a balance for you in trying to find the right verbiage, the right approach for each client?
Absolutely. And I was actually surprised when I started doing the work, how much more versatile I needed to be in terms of approach based upon the client that's sitting in front of me. I think because I'm a sensitive guy by nature, I had assumed that I would be a very sensitive therapist, that I would just be very sort of attuned to someone's emotional state and just offer them nothing but unconditional positive regard. That's what
the Kleenex box right on the table in front of them, ready.
Right. And just that really empathic, reflective listening approach. I figured that would be my style. And then I got in the room with clients and I realized like there is such a diversity of clientele in terms of their background, their upbringing, their culture, just the way that they relate and what they're going to respond to. And some people, as you described, do need to be challenged more, need to be pushed more, and they respond well to that. Others, if you push them too hard, too fast, they'll get defensive or they'll get their feelings hurt. My dad used to describe when I was growing up in sports, because I was a sensitive kid, that there's a difference, because my dad was always my coach, in baseball and soccer, that some kids need the carrot and some kids need the stick, meaning, you dangle the carrot in front of the kid and they go after it because they want that reward. Other kids, you kind of need to whoop them on the butt with the stick to get them moving, and they respond well to that. And it's a different strategy in coaching. And I think that the great coaches and leaders are people that are able to recognize that different people have different respond to different things. And so as a therapist, I'm keenly aware of that. And that's why I consider it therapy to be an art as much as or more than a science, because it's intuitive. I mean, you can't walk into a room and have a plan and then just implement that plan without any openness to what might evolve in the course of that session. And as you learn more about that person and the connection that evolves between you and that client.
Which is a great segue to this conversation with Bill, because we do talk about having a plan, but also being ready to deviate from that plan if the situation calls for it. So
right, and I feel like we're just going to give away too much of the conversation if we keep talking about this. So let's get right into it. It's a great conversation with Bill Faeth right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Bill Faeth, welcome to the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here. How are you guys today?
Great.
Wonderful. Sorry. He's great. I'm wonderful.
Well, Duck, you're always wonderful. We know
hey.
That much. It's interesting for me. Bill, you're I think maybe the third really successful business entrepreneur that we've had on the show. Duck and I come from more of sort of an arts and humanities sort of background, and
I thought you were just going to straight up be like, Duck and I are failures at businessmen. We're terrible businessmen.
Duck, you can never be a failure when you have a mustache that rivals Selleck's, I'm telling you.
See, it's a sleight of hand thing. If they're watching the mustache, they're not watching your mouth move, and you can pull one over on them.
So what I want to ask you to get the ball rolling here is, of all the stuff that I found online about you and all the things that you're doing, you're a successful entrepreneur, you're a coach, you're a speaker. What jumped out at me most is that you list yourself as an entrepreneur, family man, and business coach. Maybe that's just because I'm a sensitive guy and that just kind of like tugged at my heartstrings a little bit, but I'm curious what why it's important to you to advertise yourself in that way as a family man amidst all of the other sort of serious business advice and things that you're doing.
Because that's the most important component. And it's also one of the biggest components that most entrepreneurs miss in life. I mean, you look at the divorce rate, it's like 67%, for, CEOs of publicly traded companies. So I grew up where you guys grew up. Well, not really. I grew up in the armpit of California in Bakersfield, and then I went to UCLA and kind of stayed in that area. And my wife and I moved to Nashville, 21 years ago, because we wanted to get out of who has the best Beamer, now Cybertruck or whatever, in SoCal. And we wanted to move to the buckle of the Bible Belt, and we wanted to raise our kids here. So I that's really a 2015 and forward type of statement. Prior to that, I had done like 22, 23 startups, and it was, look, I'd been married about 18 years at that point. I've been married 26 years now. Never slept on the couch, never had to go stay in a hotel, never had a knockdown, drag out fight. Sure, we had our arguments and stuff, but one of the things that both of us learned when my wife's best friend's father was our pastor that married us in Bakersfield, going through that training was, he just really simply put, just don't go to sleep mad. If you have a huge fight or if it's about money or whatever, put that to rest before you go to bed. And we did that. But here's the thing, as an entrepreneur that was doing so many all those are bootstrapped, no private equity, nothing, right? And plenty of failures along the way as well. So I had a guy named John Bairden. I was an EO, I don't know if you guys it's an entrepreneurs organization, the largest one, like mastermind in the industry. And I got recruited in, and I had a really bad experience. And about 5-6 months in, I walked in one day, and we had 9 guys, 3 overachievers, and 6 guys that are just like there taking space. They don't have their financials ready. They don't have cash flow. They're not providing value to us other 3. And I said, guys, I'm so fucking sick and tired of this. I'm quitting today. And by the way, John, Alan, if you're the other 2 high achievers, if you want to come with me, I can't waste my fucking time with these guys anymore. And I started my own mastermind called Spark. And what we found out is that there was one critical component missing inside of EO. And it was all self-moderated. We brought in a guy named John Bairden, who was a 2-time Fortune 500 CEO, retired, now angel investor, all that type of stuff. And he was hard-nosed, man. He came in and he said, you guys are my direct reports. And if you're late, I'm locking the door and $500 fine at the next meeting, because I'm not fucking letting you in, to go to our annual retreat. He was just, he treated us like we were just, $50,000 a year, 1985 general managers in China. And that's what we found out we needed. We thought the very first meeting was going to be about business, and it wasn't. It was about life. And I just spoke to John yesterday for the first time in about a month. And I wanted to thank him for what he did for my life. I own the largest conference in my industry, the real estate short-term rental industry. And I got to have him there at my second conference, sit in the front row as I gave my life plan speech. It was all predicated on what he implemented with us. So I'm going to try to speed this up. I know it's long. But at the end of the day, in 2015, our lives changed when he put us through the first 3 months of really re-architecting our desired outcomes in life. Doesn't matter if you guys are creatives, and Ryan, I know you have a music background. I have a golf background, right? And I failed as a golfer. And, I was 3rd in the world coming out of high school going to UCLA, and I never made it to the PGA Tour. That's a failure for most people, right? So call it Jennifer Capriati syndrome or whatever.
I was just going to say, I'm with you as a failure as a golfer. That's my entire experience on the golf course is failure. But
I'm a bigger failure today, believe me. So John had us re-architect our lives. And here's something that was really critical is he said, we have to do it as the men. I think at least 5 of the 6 of us that were in that room were the alphas in the relationship. You have to do it individually. You cannot even discuss this with your wife until you're done. Then it's your responsibility to run it through with your spouse. Because if I'm the alpha, my wife, and through those young formative years, I got married at 24, she's complying with everything that I want, and she wasn't standing up. So what we found out is I was doing 3.7 startups every decade. I had my daughter who's 18 now, going to college, was like 5 years old. And we had a great relationship, but we weren't 100% aligned. And at that time, I had a net worth of about probably somewhere between $800,000 to maybe $1 million net worth. We were making $300,000-$400,000 a year as a household income. And once I went through that, and then I got my wife aligned with it, and this is just defining retirement or financial freedom. How much debt are we good with? Income, how are we going to get there? What are we, all the way down to defining intimacy. So one thing that was a challenge for me and my wife is we are not huggy-feely. We're not touchy. We're not ones to hug and kiss and cuddle on the couch when we're watching TV. She's on the lounge, I'm on the couch. Back in the day when she watched Survivor every Wednesday night, or I'm watching a soccer game or whatever that is. So we figured out we had to become more intimate with each other. And I'm not talking about sex. Sex is part of it. So in our contract, we require that we have sex 3 times a week, minimum. But most importantly, we require that we have an intimate moment with each other every single day. So once we became aligned to what we wanted financially, how we wanted to raise our kids, what we wanted to teach our kids. Like I have 2 girls, 14 and 18. The biggest thing for me is just self-confidence for them, especially for young girls in this world. Understand what boys want from them between the ages of 15 and about 40. And most importantly, financial literacy. Not most importantly, but financial literacy was a big component of that. Here's the tipping point, the linchpin. We meet every Friday from noon to 4 o'clock. So I do have 30,000 students. I have real estate all over the world. I have guests checking in, checking out, but that is the one time even my mastermind students cannot get a hold of me is between noon to 4 on Friday because we're auditing everything that's transpired in the last week. So I know that I wasn't going to see her tomorrow. She's 3 hours away setting up a house that's 10,000 square feet, designing, and we finished construction to get it ready. We're leaving for Europe on Sunday and we're under the gun. I drove down there and spent a day and a half with her to help her, but also so we could have our what we call Faith Fridays to where we could have our audit because we knew we would miss. So I can tell you since 2015, I think it was April of 2015, we have never missed a Faith Friday in that audit. And then about 2 years after doing it, we got our children involved. And we sat them down. We said, hey, how rate us on a scale of 1 to 10. How good were mommy and daddy as parents? And it was always 10. And then we had to explain to them that, hey, well, daddy wasn't here for 3 days. How does that make you feel? Were we present? Was daddy on his phone too much? Just all these things where we started getting them involved as well. And I'm happy to tell you that I kind of equate as a business guy, everything in numbers. So my net worth now is about 30 million. I make about $4 million a year. I'm happy to talk about sex, money, whatever that is. Everything has changed, and we achieved our financial freedom at 48 when we had it set for 60. I don't believe that I would have had that ability if my wife and I, who were probably 95% of the way there, if we didn't get totally to 100% to where we have been best friends, lovers, spouses, parents for 26 years, but we needed, just like everything else in life, we need that extra 5 or 10%. And then that's when everything just clicked in our life. I loved my life beforehand. Now I don't even want to fucking sleep. And I don't want to be away from my wife. I don't want to be away from my kids. Whereas the impetus for this, and I'll kind of just go back a little bit. My parents divorced in Paso Robles when I was 5. I didn't have a father growing up. And my wife made one of those slight offhanded comments, but there's a lot of truth and meaning behind it. When she told me that we hadn't had a vacation in the entire existence of our oldest daughter, Gentry, when she was 5.5 years old. She's like, you're working 7 days a week. We haven't even done a weekend getaway. And I didn't realize that. That's what the lack of alignment, led to. And that was the impetus for me to leave EO, and there's nothing wrong with EO. I just wanted something different and start Spark and bring John in. And John really is the one that transformed our lives.
Well, 10 minutes in, I feel like I've like done a seminar with a business coach. I feel like I'm already behind on my day.
I am so sorry. I did not mean to take 10 minutes. It's just
it's great. No, I'm saying 10 minutes into the podcast, I'm energized, but it leads me to a ton of questions that I want to ask. So first of all, before I even get to the question, for our listeners, I want to set the stage a little bit. So your main industry is real estate, specifically short-term rentals. Is it something that's a big part of your portfolio?
Yeah, I've got correct? 2 big things. So, my wife and I own our own short-term rental portfolio. I've got Build Short-Term Rental Wealth, which is my coaching program. That takes way more time than my investment. So I own 13 what we call super properties, like big, large properties around the country, from Montana to Cave Creek, Arizona, just north of Scottsdale, the beach, the Gulf Shores, and the Panhandle, the mountains, all that type of stuff. And then I have an investment group, Ryan Capital Group, where we do private investing in motels and hotels and stuff like that. Those are my 3 core businesses today. Gotcha.
So my question that kind of just came organically from listening to you is that it sounds like your business acumen and your success that came from that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it really kind of influenced your approach to your family and your relationships and marriage, and that like, well, if I can apply these same kind of stringent guidelines, I mean, you said yourself, you have a contract with your wife with specific, sexual requirements each week and intimacy and things like that. Do you feel that one kind of led to the other, and that I saw what worked here and I applied it to my life, my personal life, and it's worked as well? Or is there some kind of crossover between the two, or what?
1,000%, but I had to be taught that,
Okay.
Ryan, I'm sure you just didn't pop out of the womb and, were an exceptional drummer, just like I wasn't an exceptional golfer. I had to be taught, I had to practice, I had to go through those things. And it took John Bairden to say, look, Bill, you have a partnership, right? And I'm like, I have 4 partnerships in 2015 right now. He's all, do you have an operating agreement? Yes. Do you have a buy-sell agreement? Yes. He's all, why do you not have that with your fucking spouse? And I'm not talking like a prenup on the buy-sell, but he's like, why have you guys not sat down and mapped out how you're going to build your life together like you're building a business together? He's all, you're the king of startups. I've never met somebody that's done as many startups as you have, but you don't treat your personal life the same way. It's the same thing as, I have all these amazing, short-term rentals, they brand as super properties, but my house isn't a super property. It's like the greenskeeper at Brentwood Country Club or Riviera. The place is amazing for the LA Open, but you go look at his yard and he probably lives in Reseda and it's all dead, right? So, I mean, that's just the way that it works. So we don't take care of, we put that stuff, we sacrifice ourselves way too much as human beings. We've all done it, right? And so I put that into the forefront. I learned about it. We got way more active in our church at that time too, to be honest with you. And business went from being the number one priority, subconsciously and consciously, to very consciously being the number 3 priority, to where it became family, faith, family, then business. And it just wasn't that way beforehand. And look, I thought, Duck, I was doing the right thing. I'm the earner, the guy that should be pounding his chest. I'm the OCD, ADD, the quadruple type A, just typical entrepreneur that thinks I need to provide more and more and more, for that family. And I built a $50 million company and 3 $30 million companies by then. But what we did, the smart thing we did is we compartmentalized everything. So I have 19 exits. If we exited, we didn't live off that. That went completely separate, right? But what we didn't have was that operating agreement and the buy-sell agreement that we now have to guide. That's our guiding light. It's our business plan, but it's in life.
Sorry, I wanted you to clarify. What do you mean when you say you have 19 exits?
So I've sold 19 of those 34 companies.
So gotcha. I have a couple questions. I want to back up for just a minute because this is really fascinating to me. And I do think that a lot of couples and families don't spend enough time developing and communicating what their expectations are for one another. Right. And so I think that that's a really healthy strategy, is to communicate about those things, to have a plan for how you're going to implement them. You mentioned that intimacy is an important element of that. And I'm curious how you are defining intimacy. What qualifies as true intimacy, as opposed to, sex is important, but is that the biggest part of it? Or is there something else that's more intangible that you're describing as intimacy?
Sex is separate from intimacy for us.
Okay.
So we had sex prior to, doing this agreement, but my focus was on being at work and I was gone. Right. I was building businesses. And the first thing that we had to define as intimacy is, what would make the other one feel, better about themselves? What would the other one feel more loved? So that's really the definition for us, is we want to make sure that we're instead of just saying, hey, I love you, Ryan, it could be, hey, Bria, I love you, but it's a kiss on the neck, or like something we would never do. She's cooking. I'd come up and give her a shoulder rub and a hug and kiss her on the neck and tell her how much I love her. Right. Mm. That's what we would define as intimacy. That boosts her self-confidence. That boosts, me showing her as opposed to telling her how much I love her. The sex thing is completely separate from that, but they are somewhat intertwined because sometimes they lead. Sometimes the intimacy leads to sex, and sometimes sex leads to intimacy. And it's just, I think that the other thing that's interesting, you can see how open I am about money, my sex life, whatever. I was never that open. We were both guarded and shielded prior to going through this, and we were from each other. So like, as an example, I quit playing professional golf when I got together with my wife. I went to my CPA, if you guys have ever heard of Taft, California, small little oil town, like population 10,000 back in the day. I opened a restaurant there. And so she ended up running the restaurant. Then I became the college golf coach at Cal State Bakersfield. And I was still playing professional golf on the side a little bit. And I had another business, Bell Aqua Bikinis, that got acquired by Venus Swimwear. I was drop shipping from Brazil, sarongs and swimwear and stuff on AOL chat rooms and Netscape, if you guys are old enough to remember that in the early to mid 90s. So, but she would never say anything about when I was gone, right? And it wasn't intentional. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I was gone all the time, always on the road as a college golf coach, traveling, trying to play, mini tour events and revive my career and that type of stuff. And also I dropped her in that restaurant that she had no desire to be in, but she never complained one time. She was the good wife, right? Mm-hmm. And what we found out as we got older and we went through this process and re-architecting this together, man, that really hurt her. Really hurt her because I wasn't there. And I didn't know that till like 15, 18 years later because I just didn't know any different.
You're talking about more communication. Affection seems like it's a really important part of this, being affectionate and supportive of your partner. The way that I talk about intimacy when I'm working with couples, clients, my working definition for intimacy is the ability to be truly vulnerable with your partner, to be the person that you are at your core, all your strengths, your weaknesses, the things that are your insecurities, as well as your confidence, and have that person accept you in that form, and vice versa, and be supportive of one another, to know that you can let down the guard or the mask that you wear to the world and that you are accepted. That to me is true intimacy. It may not be everyone's working definition, but I find that in relationships, we're most comfortable and most connected when we feel that. Is that a part of what you're describing as intimacy?
1,000%. But for everybody listening out there, I will tell you that took us 3-4 years to be able to get to that point.
Yeah.
Because that's what was the separation. That was that 5 to 10% that we were, probably really 20% that we were missing in that relationship. Even though it was good, we wanted it to be immaculate, right? And we had to get to that point, but we had to define it first because we didn't know any different. And that's kind of the way we were brought up. And her and I talk about this a lot. Like her parents, they're still alive. We moved them here. Her mother is a kept woman. That's her term. Like she doesn't know anything, right, about anything. And there is no intimacy between, her parents. And we can see that today. And as they've gotten older, they've gotten farther and farther apart. And I'm 51. My wife is 48. We've made a conscious effort, health-wise, intimacy-wise, communication-wise in our relationship. We want our relationship to continue to get stronger, right, as opposed to grow farther apart. So we're very cognizant about that today. We were not prior to going through this, and it didn't happen overnight. And by overnight, I mean like in 4 or 5 months. It took probably 3 or 4 years if I look back on it.
Something that it keeps kind of coming up in my mind when I think about not just your conversation about a contract and with your wife, but also just the concept of, I've been married for 12 years now. And, we go through the same lulls that other, couples do, where the honeymoon phase ends and you aren't as intimate, you aren't as touchy-feely, things like that. But also, I'm always kind of, I don't want to say, I get the ick to use the kids term, but like when people talk about like, we have a scheduled date every Wednesday to go out to dinner, whether we want to or not. I think of a contract and I think of, that's a business arrangement. So regardless of if I'm sick, if I'm sad, if I'm, I want to be on vacation, I have made this agreement in this contract. So I live up to that. With my wife, I want to be able to say, I don't feel like it tonight. Like, well, I know we have our agreement to go on a date on Wednesdays, but I feel like crap today. And I want to have the intimacy and the openness with her where she can say, okay, you're not breaking a contract. You're just my husband. So I would sometimes that thought kind of scares me to think of like, well, you're forcing intimacy or you're trying to shoehorn a relationship into a place where you specifically should have the freedom to say to somebody, no, I don't feel like that tonight. I don't want to have our scheduled sex tonight because I don't feel sexy. I don't feel good about myself. Mm-hmm. Like, does that come up? Or do you find that
every day
enforcing yourself to do those things that you might not want to do, that by the end of it, you are glad that you did it and you want to do it? Or are there days when you go, this didn't work, I wish we hadn't done this today?
1,000% every day. Something like that comes up, right? So I'll give you an example. One of the big things that I look at, and taking from the business world into the personal world. Every business needs to have a business plan. I teach that to every one of, and anybody that's doing, you got to have a business plan. But the business plan is not your roadmap. The business plan should be your guiding light, and it should give you a more intimate relationship with your business, right? Whether it's a client retention plan, a scaling plan, a cash flow report, whatever it is, it just gives you as the CEO, the owner, a much more intimate understanding, as opposed to the person. What I started out was what I call the shoebox owner. All my receipts go into a shoebox. They go to my CPA at the end of the year and have a checking account. And I didn't know what a P&L or a balance sheet or any of that type of stuff was. So what John taught us is you just need to be able to keep score so you know where you're at and you have an intimate relationship with the process of moving forward or moving backwards. So there is no question, since 2015, my wife have missed quite a few Fridays. There's no question we've gone weeks of having no sex when I'm gone for a week or she's there or whatever that is. And there's plenty of time where, you know what, I've had an extra piece of cheesecake and an extra glass of wine and I feel like shit. And, I don't want to have sex, or she feels like she's bloated or whatever women feel like and that type of stuff. And she's just not ready or in the mood or whatever it is. We hear the kids walking up and down the stairs when we start, and you got to stop. We've all, as parents, have lived through that stuff. So, yeah, I mean, all it is it's defining what we want out of life in the business and the personal side as a couple and as children, as a son-in-law, as a daughter, because we know in some form or fashion we've planned for, because I got caught off guard when my mother passed away, and we're planning for what we're going to have to do for her parents. Like, to manage, like if her father passes away, who is in the worst health of the two by far, which most likely that will happen, her mom doesn't know anything. I know where everything is. I know where the safe is. I know where the docs are. So the other thing is, we created, based on an experience with my mother, we have, basically, we call it the death packet. And inside of our safety deposit box, and we helped her father put it together. So that way, Bria and I, that's my wife's name, know where everything, we know where the life insurance policies are. We know who's the attorney is. We know where the living trust is, all the way down to bank statements and mortgage and all that type of stuff. Because I had to fly to Florida. I retired my mom down to the Villages, a retirement community, if you've ever heard of that before.
Oh, yeah.
America's friendliest hometown. They don't tell you it's the largest contingent of STDs, in the entire country, worse than Vegas.
Hey, they're living life, right? They're not hanging
They live it up down there, I'm telling you.
They're scheduled 3 times a week, too. It's just not with their spouse.
So, I mean, we got caught off guard. So we put this packet together and we did it for her. But now we know we're going to have to take care of one of them. And some for either physically for the father-in-law or financially, and take care of all the back end stuff for mom, right? One of the two. So that's part of our life plan, to know that we have to do that, right? We've got a daughter that's going to college in September or August at Belmont University here, who is going into pre-med to become a surgeon. So that's one of a lot of my clients, students are doctors. That's where the financial literacy comes in. Hey, you need to understand you're walking out of this 10-year education with $600,000 in debt. Right. And you're not going to make over $150,000 for another decade, once you get done. So you better be comfortable living with that debt, because dad's not paying for all of your college. I'm paying in-state tuition, I said, so this is going to cost you $60K. So that's another $40,000. You're going to have $240,000 in debt when you get done with undergrad. Right. And kind of just walking through all those things. So it's about the planning. And that's where a lot of unsuccessful entrepreneurs fall short on the business side, is they have problem with the vision of forecasting, right? And people, well, how are you going to forecast what something is going to cost 5 years from now? Well, let's just take the current inflation rate and look at the history over the last 5 years and, predict what's going to happen. It's okay if you're off by 5 or 10%. Same thing with our life. So we made a huge change in our life. We made a big decision. We were in Montana for Christmas. We have a house in Whitefish. And we came back like 2 days before Christmas to be with the family. And my wife and I said, you know what? I had major health issues. I was in the process of losing about 75 pounds. But we went to a concierge doctor. We've been with the same doctor for 18 years. And we wanted to be more proactive. Because in part of our life plan, we had determined we'd just become snowboarders and skiers. Bought a house in Montana so we could go to Whitefish and do that all during the winter. We skied 22 days last winter. And we're like, hey, we want to do this for like the next 20 years. Yeah. So if you guys know who Gary Brecka is, a biohacker with Grant Cardone, 10X Health, and we got a concierge doctor, and now We've done the gene mutation test. I found out I was going to die in about 11 years, 2 months actually. And they can predict it within 90 days accuracy, which is crazy based on this gene mutation testing. So I've changed my entire health regimen from supplements to, in my gym next door, saunas, red light therapy, all this type of stuff. And I went back and I got another gene mutation test, added 14 and a half years to that. So like our goal is we want to live an active, healthy lifestyle by our definition, not just walking every day in the park and that type of stuff, hiking, like we're going to Europe and we're hiking in Spain, we're hiking in, doing all this stuff in Italy and going to Switzerland and doing all these things and then finishing up with Taylor. I can't be too tired when I take my girls to see, the Swifties, in Zurich. But we want to do that stuff till we're 70. That's kind of our plan. So I'll give you an example. You might know, you guys are old enough. You remember Karate Kid, the movie or the television show, Cobra Kai? So Martin Kove, Sensei Kreese, the bad sensei, is a very good friend of mine. And he's the exact same age as my father-in-law, Rod. They're both 76. Martin is still fucking ripped. He could still go back into Predator or, First Blood with his best friend Sly and literally take the shirt off at 76. And he's got abs and he's got pecs, right? He's in great shape physically, mentally. My father-in-law, not so much. So we've used my father-in-law as the example and Marty as the example of like, hey, we want to be Marty when we're in our 70s. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be having to use a walker and all this other stuff. So prepping now, I wish I would have started when I was 30, but started when I'm 50, but I've already added 14 years of life expectancy, which is nice.
It's a lot like a financial portfolio where you wish you had started saving, but it's better late than never in terms of if you're going to make that change.
Life is very similar. I just think people that don't have that business acumen, and I get like you guys classify yourselves as creatives, right? And typically, it's funny. I met with a TV producer when I asked you, Ryan, if you could hook up with me in Santa Monica last week or 2 weeks ago, and he's a creative. And he's like, man, I'm from England. I'm a creative. I have no idea about all this stuff that you're talking about. Right. And I'm like, well, I can help you with that. He's like, nope, I'm not interested. I've got a business manager that takes care of all that stuff. I said, I hope you fucking trust him with your life.
Yeah. Well, I have a question along those lines, but I want to back up just for a minute and make just one point for our audience. You mentioned that you are, and it's clear from the way that you talk about this, that you are, a quadruple type A, very much an alpha dog, and you're clearly very organized and very driven, and you have a plan for the things that you do both personally and professionally. The point I want to make, I was actually just having a conversation yesterday with some of my colleagues about relationships and personality types within relationships. Every relationship is different, right? And I think what you're describing, the way that your relationship was before you went through this transformation in terms of your communication, was very much a traditional type of the man is the alpha. The man makes the decisions in the relationship. The woman is more submissive and more of the nurturer, maybe the type that brings more sensitivity to the relationship. And that works for some people, that dynamic. There's nothing wrong with that dynamic. There's just as many women out there that are type A, more alpha types that are, business women who go out in the world and make the money and make the decisions, and men that are more happy to be more submissive to that leader. But in any type of relationship, I think what happens is the thing that you're attracted to, and it may be that you're attracted to somebody because they are an alpha, sometimes becomes the thing that you resent most about that person, right? Yep. Later in the relationship, it's like, well, I love that this guy or this woman is so on top of their shit. But then it becomes, can't we ever just like let loose and throw out the plan and have some fun and just go fly by the seat of our pants? You're always having to be so organized. I'm more spontaneous. It becomes sometimes a problem in the relationship. So the point that I want to make is that it's not about necessarily changing who you are at your core in order to resolve those differences. Sometimes those differences are the reason why you were attracted to each other in the first place. It's about finding the middle ground and finding a way to communicate about it so that you can have that intimacy. You can be who you truly are, but you're also willing to compromise, and you're also willing to think about the ways in which you need to advocate for self as well as accommodate to others. Because sometimes people accommodate too much and they give up themselves, as it sounds like maybe your wife was doing to a certain extent, and they need to learn to have more of a voice and be more assertive in the relationship. Doesn't mean they have to become the alpha. It can mean that they just need to have more of an equal share in the partnership, and vice versa. Whoever is kind of the leader, it doesn't mean they have to stop being that. That can work in the relationship. They just maybe have to be a little bit more sensitive and more attuned to their partner's needs. So that was the point I wanted to make. Now I want to kind of shift gears. You talk about being this type A, and that being sort of the prototype of the businessman entrepreneur. And I have seen that in my experience and the people that I've met. For me, and I talked about being a creative and artist type, I was a guy in a band as a teenager that got signed to a major record deal. And to me, in that world, when we entered the sort of corporate world of major labels, there were the artists and there were the suits, right? And to us, now forgive me for this. Yeah, it was the man, right? And forgive me for this. This is my teenage mind, and probably a little bit of that's still there, and I've adapted this over time. But in my mind, as a teenage creative type, we were human beings who felt things and had humanity, and the suits were just sharks, right? They were these cold-hearted people who all they cared about was the bottom line. And my question for you is there a certain personality type that excels in business? Do you need to be a type A alpha wolf with a killer instinct to do well in the business world? Can anyone be successful? Are there people that aren't that way that are successful? How does that work? Do you see all different types, or are most of the people you work with similar to you in terms of personality?
I mean, it's the analogy that you use, Ryan, from the music industry. It's the exact same in sports, right? You have the front office, and then you have like NFL football operations or hockey operations or whatever that is. I see a lot of that in business too, because there's a lot of the non-alphas, I almost want to say type A and type B, but I don't want to be that specific. They despise, the B despises the A despises the B in many cases. But I think like with any great team, whether it's business, whether it's, a spousal team, a relationship, whether it's in business, I kind of go back to, I was a Lakers season ticket holder back in the day. And if you remember Gary Payton, Karl Malone, when they brought in all those guys, and
that was a rough year.
Out so well,
didn't work.
You look at what happened when LeBron went to Miami. I get they won a couple championships, but they should have been there for, longer than the Bulls run with the team that they took. It takes everybody. It takes multiple personality types to build a successful business. And you don't have to, if you're the leader, you don't have to be a quadruple type A like myself. I will tell you, I am way more docile and more floated towards B than I am a quadruple type A outside of the business setting for whatever reason. And I don't know why. And it's not fake, because you can tell just how passionate, how fired up I get about this, right? But when I'm at home, I'm the B. This is my girl's kingdom. I have 2 girls. I've got a wife, a cat, and 2 dogs, and they're all female. It's all filled with estrogen in this house. So I am the submissive one here. And I'm the guy. I went to a Brendan Burchard conference in San Diego probably 5 years ago, right before COVID. And I took my social media manager and my COO, and I knew nobody there. And that was the first time that I've been around 2,500 people. Nobody knew me, and I didn't know anybody. And you remember back in junior high growing up, you go to the dance and you're over. Well, I didn't have phones back then. Maybe you guys are young enough, but you're sitting there with your over here pretending to be busy on the wall while everybody else is having fun when you don't have a girl or whatever to do. I mean, I'm that guy when I'm in an uncomfortable setting. And I think regardless of personality type, everybody has both sides of the spectrum in some, respect. So I don't think you have to be, a guy like myself that's always amped up, that has all these OCD, ADD, type of characteristics, strong type A. But I do think you need to be cognizant of how a disc profile works and what motivates and how to communicate with people. And that's something I learned, once again, going through this process with John. We did disc profile tests between me and my wife. And I'm like, well, shit, I need to do this in my business.
Can you say what that is? Because I'm not familiar with that term, Bill. Sorry.
It's like a Myers-Briggs, like a personality test, right?
Right. Okay.
And the thing that I like about disc is it puts you on, kind of this line. And my COO now, his name's Chris. He came to work for me I'm about 5-6 months into this whole life transformation thing that I'm doing with John. And he was the first employee that I ran through a disc profile test. And what I learned, the most important thing I learned about Chris is employees prior to then were dispensable to me. They were just a number. Like you talked, the suits, they didn't give a shit. If you don't produce, you're gone, and I'll replace you with somebody that's going to produce. And what I found out, and I always incentivize people by money. And what I found out by Chris is Chris was incentivized not by money, but by other acts of kindness, right? So he had worked for me for 40 days and he was so overproducing, and he's a type B personality. And we always took off between Christmas to New Year's. I'd shut the whole office down. I had 18 employees at that time in a marketing agency. And I said, hey man, what are you doing over Christmas? I'm thinking about going to this Passion conference in Atlanta. It's a Christian conference, a big thing that they have there. And I knew nothing about it. I said, cool, have fun. That was it. And then I went back into my office and I Googled it to figure out what it was. And I bought him like VIP tickets. And then I had a limousine company like Music Express or Empire CLS, if you guys have used those or see those things around LA. And so I got him a car to take him to the Passion conference so he didn't have to drive the 4 hours from Nashville. And when we were walking out on December 23rd, and I'd let everybody know, hey, we'll see you January 2nd or 3rd. And I gave everybody else cash, but I gave Chris the tickets and all that stuff. And I put him up at I think I put him at the Ritz-Carlton in Buckhead in Atlanta. And he'd never experienced anything like that before. And he walked back into his office and didn't say anything. He waited for everybody to leave. And then he came back out after he knew everybody was gone. I could see that his eyes were red. I'm like, you okay? He's like, nobody's ever done anything like that for me. And he worked in a church for 6 years in Orlando, Florida. And he's all, nobody's ever done anything like that. I said, well, I figured you'd like this rather than money based on your DISC profile test. So Chris is an example. He's been with me for 6.5 years now. He started at $40,000 a year salary. He's making over $250,000 now, which is great. His parents never made more than $90,000 combined. But the most important thing is not the money for him. For the last probably 4.5 years, he went to high school here in Nashville before he went to Florida. He has been teaching and mentoring kids in their, media program that they have there every Friday. So he gets to work 4 hours. A lot of those types of things I've done for him as opposed to giving money away. So I think it's very typical, kind of, Ryan, to come full circle on your question. Any personality type can build a successful business, but I think it's the personality types that you see here that I have that run people away and that don't treat people the right way. So I had to really learn, and I did it through Chris and through the experience with John Bairden, to figure out that I needed less people that were compensated based on the way they wanted to be compensated and not the way that I wanted to compensate them. And it's not always about money. And then I carried those things over, into my personal life with my kids. Like my kids don't get a financial weekly allowance, or I don't even go down the Dave Ramsey path and give them a commission. They get non-monetary things, for that type of stuff, because, that whole love part that me and my wife didn't get taught growing up. And I think that's what transcended into our relationship. That's more important than, commission or an allowance, or them being able to go buy the new shirt for $90 at Lululemon or whatever that is. So I think it's really about perspective and how we shape things. So you look at Tim Cook as an example, probably one of the most successful CEOs. He is definitively a type B personality. He is not the typical, alpha, high powered, CEO. And to step in for probably one of the most famous CEOs of all time, Steve Jobs, and be able to do what he's done with Apple, I think is pretty impressive. I don't see Bill Gates, with my type of personality. I don't see Elon Musk. So I think it's really more about what's in the inner core than it is just about personality type.
And it's also, you're basically, to use the parlance of our times, you're talking about the love language. Different people have different love language, and it isn't so much about your personality overwhelming and being the defining characteristic. It's more about your ability to give each person or each business or each relationship what it specifically needs. And that kind of goes back to what you were talking about before about your contract with your family, which is it's a like you say, it's a guiding light. It's not a roadmap. So if you have to go this way to get there, then that's okay. And if you have to go this way to get there, that's okay, as long as you are headed towards that North Star. And I think in business, if your bottom line is income, then yeah, you can rule with an iron fist and cut out any inefficiencies and fire people who aren't making their quotas, et cetera, et cetera. And that's certainly a business model that works. But if your goal is to have happy employees and to make the world a better place and, you know, all those things, then yeah, there's certainly got to be some different love languages spoken to everybody involved, because, you know, different people need different things to be happy, to feel fulfilled. And so it sounds like you have made an effort to be cognizant of those different languages and try to speak fluently.
Yeah, and every person on this planet should read that book 4 times, 5 times. I've read it, I think, probably 3 or 4 times. That's a great reference.
Well, I can relate this back to my experience, you know, going out into the world. I obviously didn't think of myself as a business entrepreneur when I was younger, but looking back on the things that went wrong for me, being a sensitive type and being in a very high pressure situation, my wish 20 years ago was that the corporations, the record label, the management company had a little bit more empathy for the fact that we were human beings that were doing this work and going out into the world, and what our particular needs or insecurities or challenges might be. That is starting to change in the music business. You're starting to see managers and record labels providing therapists for their artists, providing resources for them because of the long, you know, weeks and months and years on the road and doing the things that are so challenging. And the argument that I make, I wrote an article in Variety magazine last year about this. The argument that I make is that even if you're thinking strictly from a business standpoint, even if you're thinking about building a career and a business that is profitable and sustainable, thinking of the people that work with you and for you as human beings and being empathic with them and facilitating an environment in which they're going to thrive is more conducive to that sustainability than not doing that, right? That's my feeling. I don't know if that's realistic because I haven't lived in the corporate world, let's say, very often. But I think that in any model of success, there can be humanity, and I would argue that making that a priority in the model of your business will pay dividends. Do you find that to be true?
1,000%. I guess that I'm a sports guy. The best analogy I can give you is really Phil Jackson. You know, when he was with the Lakers, or when he really, let's go back to, you know, the Bulls. And if you've watched The Last Dance and you know anything about Dennis Rodman and how he had to treat specifically Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman completely differently. Like literally when he let him go in the finals, go to Vegas and party with Carmen Electra and then come back, probably 99.9% of other coaches would not have let him go. And Dennis would have went anyways. And then he would have benched him. And then there would have been a different outcome. So I think it's how you, and that guy, you know, I grew up as a John Wooden guy, and I would put, you know, Phil probably up there with him as the Zen master, but dealing with the personalities, right? And I think that's a lot of what, kind of going back to what you said, Ryan, in the music industry. I've got a lot of friends here in Nashville that have done stuff like what you've done. And my best friend's Marty Rowe, if you're any old school lead singer, Diamond Rio. And they went, and I've had very similar conversations with him until they left their label and, you know, went out and did their own label, right? And they felt like they got their freedom back, and that people actually cared. But I see it in business and I see it in sports all the time. And I think that you used a word called empathy, right? And I think that is one of the most important words that people have to, a great leader understands empathy, right? And that's something that I was a great business builder, but I wasn't a great leader. I am now, since about 2015, I've become a great leader. And I've gone back and apologized to former employees that I've fired and probably didn't treat the way that I should have, you know, up until that point. But if you can't really understand empathy and be empathetic to your staff. I mean, like I said earlier, mine were transactional. Once I viewed them as a human being, I viewed them as the asset that were more valuable than myself, then that's when things started to change. And it's ironic. All of this started, for me at least, with John Bairden and with that whole life plan. I'm not going to call it a contract anymore, Duck. It's going to be just
no, really, that's obviously it rubs me the wrong way. I keep bumping on it. But I don't mean it to be.
Because it is just the plan, right? But empathy, I don't think of that word a whole lot for whatever reason, but I can tell you that is probably one of the things that I gained out of that experience. And when Chris came to work for me, He was hired as a videographer, and about 90 days, 100 days after he started, and he's the number 2 that I plan on taking to the grave with me for all my businesses. I lost my number 2, and it was a female. Her name was Jessica. And I thought she was going to be the one, you know, to go the distance, and we'd only been together for about a year and a half. And what I identified was I was trying to groom her to become the number 2, where Chris kind of just odd by default, because of the connection between him and I, he just kind of slid in there. You know what I mean? It didn't have to teach him, didn't have to groom him. He just accepted the responsibility, knew what was coming. He wanted it, and it just fit. You know what I mean? I don't know. I can't go back 26 years and really pinpoint one thing of why my wife and I ended up marrying each other. It's just we fit together. You know, we fell in love with each other. You know, how do you define love? I don't even know how you can really define it, to be honest with you. At least I can't. But I know that I knew I didn't want to spend another day with another female for the rest of my life. And she felt that same way, and we still feel that way 26 years later. And it's kind of that same thing with Chris. And ironically, at the time when he started, I had 18 employees. I've had over 700 in a company before, but now it's just me and him. And we don't want other employees. So we've restructured our business model the way that I've restructured my personal model around what we want from that desired outcome. But I do think, Ryan, that empathy is probably the key word that's been mentioned here in the last 15 minutes.
So the leaders, the people that are the traditional alphas, could benefit from having some empathy and compassion and understanding of the humanity.
Hopefully more than some.
Well, all would benefit. Sure. Well, what advice though would you give? Because I think that, you know, there are a lot of people on the other end of the spectrum that want success, that do have a plan for where they want to be in the world, in their business or otherwise. And they don't have that type of personality, that killer instinct. That they may be more insecure. They might have self-doubt, imposter syndrome. What advice would you give? I know maybe you can't relate to them directly because you're not that type, but you've just mentioned that you work with people that are very different from you in that regard. So what advice would you give to somebody who is entering the world that you work and live in, that may not have that type of personality right out of the box, but wants to pursue the kind of success that you're talking about?
I would tell them to seek it out. If they believe they need somebody with that killer instinct or a different type of mentality, find that person to partner with. So I know we hear a lot of people, most people that have either never really been in business, they've been a W-2, or they've had an unsuccessful business in a partnership, will tell you never to do a partnership. I can tell you my 34 startups, which technically is probably 37 now, but I've had partners in like 95% of them. And I've only had one negative separation inside of them. And almost probably the 2 negative separations were because our personality types were almost identical. Right. And one of them, I was the alpha, the other one, I wasn't the alpha. And the problem is when you are an alpha and you're not the alpha and you don't think the other person's performing, then you end up building resentment. Right. So I think at the end of the day, I think that person should do the same thing as like what I would do in somebody with my personality. Build out your roadmap, build out your plan, and figure out who you need to go on that journey with, right? Whereas I used to go on the journey alone. And I think a lot of people go on the journey alone. You look at anything. I mean, go back to, you know, you were in a band, you know, could you have done what you did with arguably one of the biggest bands in the last 10 or 15, 20 years by yourself? Probably not. Could Jordan have won the championships without Pippen, without Rodman, without, you know, his all the other supporting?
Bill Wennington, like the linchpin of that
Bill
team.
Wennington, yeah, that dude had a great beard. I mean,
right?
Was that the inspiration for the stash?
Well, you know, I mean, no, it's probably a lot more Phil Jackson in the 80s and 90s was the stash.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
Yeah.
So I think there's always a mix. You don't see just type A personalities being successful. They need the type Bs. Right. You have to build a team and a unit, and that requires that word that you used, Ryan. It's empathy. You have to have structure. I mean, John Wooden was the master of this at UCLA, you know, back in the day. Right. And it wasn't just about Bill Walton. It wasn't just about Lou Alcindor back in the day. It was all the supporting cast, you know, that was built around them. And you look at a lot of these successful businesses, and we see it more with teams. Right. And the teams look at what Bill Belichick did. And he had one great player for whatever it was, 15, 16, 17 years. Wes Welker turned into a superstar, but he was literally a B-class role player, that Brady helped him, reach that full potential. And I could go through 50 or 100 of those. Same thing with Peyton Manning. Just a lot of those different components. I mean, I'll go back to the Lakers just because I'm a diehard Lakers fan. Kurt Rambis looked like he actually had some athleticism when he was on the court with Magic Johnson. Right. But, if it was Byron Scott at the point, it looked a little bit different, right? Sure. And so there's these other people can bring different, I think, personality types, different success levels, and move people to a different level. And I see it in golf, even though it's an individual sport, the greatest, at least, experience for me is watching like a Ryder Cup or the team. Mm-hmm. And when and I know who's playing like shit when they're going in, but then you see it's not usually just that individual that can rise to the top. It's the team lifting him up. Right. And I think that's the trait of a bad leader is when you have the personality that I have and you're a bad leader, you're pushing everybody else down. When you are a great leader, you are lifting everybody else up and you believe in all tides.
Yeah. Well, you're describing empathy, but you're also describing collaboration in which the differences between people can actually be complementary as opposed to being a problem where you have differences that don't align. That's where synergy happens, right? When the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I found that to be true in my band. You mentioned my band. It's kind of amazing that it worked because in some ways we were all kind of stubborn, I won't say type A, but all headstrong individuals, the original 4 members of the band, but we were all very different in our proclivities and the way that we approached the music. Adam has ADHD. I mean, he's been open about that, and can be flighty, he can be impulsive, but very creative, obviously very talented. But willing to just go wherever the moment takes him. Whereas I, by nature, tend to be more obsessive and more perfectionistic and have a harder time kind of letting go. And then Jesse was sort of this manic creative guy who's always like 3 steps ahead of all of us, thinking about what we're going to be doing in 5 years when we have a 24-piece orchestra to put on our arrangements and stuff like that. So between the 3 of us, we were on different planets, but it worked for some reason because we were complementary. I think Adam needed me to give him a little bit of focus and the work ethic and the organizational skill. I needed him not just for his talent, but to get me out of where I could get stuck by being too, focused on the minutia. He could lead me into being more open and just going with the flow more and chasing an idea as opposed to overthinking it too much. And Jesse, of course, being the dreamer, was helpful in that process as well. So I think that this is true in romantic relationships too. We kind of touched on it earlier, but opposites attract for a reason. You get 2 alphas in a relationship together. Sometimes they just butt heads. And how are you going to make any decisions? How are you going to, you're 2 alike. And sometimes it's the fact that you have differences. It doesn't make you incompatible. It actually makes you complementary. And if you can get past the ways in which sometimes those differences don't align and they cause some problems through communication, then any group, whether it's a couple, it's a business, it's a band, it's a team, can actually benefit from that kind of synergy.
Well said. I agree 100%.
Bill, before we finish today, I want to ask, because one of the goals of this podcast is to shine a light on people like you who have achieved success in their particular field. When we talk to actors, musicians, athletes as well, but to also show that maybe despite that success, that everybody still struggles with the same issues, in mental health that we all kind of talk about. So I want to ask you, you obviously have a plan in place for how to get your businesses to work efficiently, how to get your family and your relationships to work efficiently. But where are places where you still struggle? What does that look like for a guy who has as many successful businesses and income and things like that? What are things that still stress you out and maybe you don't deal with the efficiency that you do with other issues in your life? Are there still things that cause you stress and that you maybe think I could handle this better, but I still haven't gotten a grasp on this yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there's things that I don't like to do. Most importantly, like I don't like to do my books, meaning like QuickBooks or data entry or any of that stuff. And it's funny when I tell this to people that are in my community, because I preach financials. I don't have to be the person to put the data in. I do need to have the intimate relationship with the financials on the back end. I stress out mostly about the economy, to be honest with you. That's what drives my stress. We're in the most stressful cycle of every 4 years right now, at least for me, because I just did a thing with Fox News yesterday, and I believe regardless of the outcome, whether the Dems win or the Republicans win, doesn't matter if it's President Biden or former President Trump or whoever, I think we're going to see some type of fallout from it because our country is so divided. That's what I worry about. Now, I stopped watching news right around this time, maybe April, May of 2020, like blocked it on Facebook, social, TV, everywhere, because that did stress me out because I worry about that stuff that I can't control. So that's my big stressor. And that's something I've tried to work on as I get older and hopefully get a little bit more mature, that don't worry about stuff that you can't control. So like this whole thing, and I was doing Fox yesterday and I'm like, why am I even talking about this? I am one vote, right? And we talk about everybody's vote counts, but I'm not going to swing the election. So I just need to sit back and wait and see what plays out. And I have absolutely no control, over what's going to happen. And it's, for me, because of my primary business is real estate, it's like capital gains tax, interest rates, all these different types of things. And people think it's because it's really of real estate. It's because I lived 16 years of my life in the retail business. My glow-in-the-dark miniature golf business, we were like Gap. We were in over 200 shopping malls around the country, from, the Northridge Mall back in the day and Ontario Mills all the way to Boston and the Palisade Center in West Nyack. And consumer confidence, what really drives our economy is what happens between that election and the end of the year. So make sure you guys spend some money on the kids and everybody during Christmas, because that's really what will impact the first 2 quarters of our business. So I look at those things, and that's kind of what causes my stress and probably what I freak out about more than I should, and I shouldn't waste any time because I just can't do anything about that.
Like how does that stress manifest in a guy like you?
I don't have much stress anymore, to be very honest with you. I mean, I used to be a super high stress guy, super high blood pressure on, Eliquis and every blood, thinner and medication you could imagine. I've gotten off of that stuff in the last year due to the weight loss journey and getting healthy. But also I don't focus on that stuff as much as I used to. I mean, my stress is probably diminished about 90%. And if anybody tells you that money doesn't change things, they're full of shit. Because when you do have financial security, you worry about a lot less stuff. I'm not worried about paying a mortgage. I'm not worried about interest rates going to 10%. I worry more about my staff and the other people in my life than anything. Probably the biggest stressors, honestly, for me is my oldest daughter going to college. She's only going to be 20 minutes away. It's like living in the Valley and, going to Cal State Northridge or going to UCLA or whatever. It's not that far, but I'm still worried about her. And the biggest elimination of stress for me and my wife, honestly, is when we left California and we moved to Tennessee. I vowed that I would, that was 21 years ago. I vowed that I would never build a big company again. And that's why I have so many startups, is because I would build primarily, I'd want to get to 5, 10 million, then exit. If I have to have 20 or 30 employees again, I'm just not interested. So now I'm on a mission to build a $50 million a year business with 1 employee, right? And I believe that's the wave of the future with AI. We can train bots to do work. Everybody's gone down the virtual assistants work, but I just don't. Employees are what give me stress because I can't control people, right? And so really, I've got my guy, my ride or die guy, who I'm gonna hopefully take to my deathbed first, because he's about 16 years younger than me. And, we've been together for 6.5 years. And now it's about eliminating stress. So in my life plan, I have a daughter that just got done with her freshman year in high school. My definition of retirement, that's not Al Bundy, sitting on the couch with my hand down my pants watching, whatever shows he used to watch. But it's less stress. And it's more travel, which I already do a ton of, but with my wife, because I travel about 50-60% of the time for business without my wife. Hence why I'm leaving to go on this trip. We're doing something for each one of my girls, right? So it's like Spain for my oldest daughter for her graduation gift. My oldest girl, which is my wife, it's Italy and Amalfi Coast, and then we drink wine. So we go to Florence and do some wine tasting. And then it's Taylor for my youngest daughter. That she could care less about Spain or Italy or Switzerland.
Right.
She just wants to go to Taylor and have me be able to introduce her to Andrea and get the hat. And Taylor's mom, because Taylor was a client of mine for 7 years in another business. I'm like, I can't guarantee the hat, and I can't guarantee that by any means, and I'm willing to sacrifice. But the last thing I'll share about this big European trip that we're doing, and Ryan, you kind of talked about that, is the planner and, having everything to a T. And then there's these, kind of, I call them freestyle, the happy-go-lucky, people. Well, this will be the first, obviously when you go on a vacation like this, you got to have stuff planned out. But we have I think it's a 18-day vacation, like 5 or 6 days with nothing on the itinerary. Because I'm the guy that every minute, we're getting up at this time, ours coming to pick us up here, like your manager would do with you when you're on the road, right? And that's the way that I would treat the family. And they're like, hey, when I gave this gift to them at Christmas in Montana, they were excited. And then the excitement stopped and they're like, all of them, we have one request. We want some downtime to relax.
How many fountains do we have to see, Dad?
So no itineraries, Dad. Tell us when we're flying and whatever, but let's just relax when we're there. So that's what I've got to, and they're doing that for me too, to try to de-stress and leave everything at home. And I guess to answer your question, Duck, the hardest part for a guy like me is to go do that and to turn it off. Mm-hmm. So do I have the SOPs? Do I have my shit together in business and in life to where I can leave that behind and not have to worry about it? And that takes the other people in the business, the other people in the band, the other people on the team to support me while I'm gone. So like Chris, my COO, he went to Europe about 5 weeks ago for like 10 or 12 days. And I said, I am not contacting you. Remember, it's just two of us, right? And he's the one that does all the back office, all the back end, all that stuff. And I think I slacked him like once or twice. And, and he told me, I've got to see him tomorrow. And then he's like, I'm not going to reach out to you unless, the house is burning down or something like that. So planning for that, I hate to use that word, but planning for that ahead of time and having those right people in the right spots can alleviate that. Because I'll leave you with one last thing in regards to the business side and the personal side. If you can't leave your spouse for 3 to 4 weeks and come back and have your marriage pick up exactly where it left off, then you've got an issue as a spousal, as a couple. If you can't leave your business for 3, 4, 5 weeks and walk away and have no communication, then you really don't have a business. You've just created yourself a job. And and a lot of those startups that I did, I couldn't leave. And I had to be on the phone, or I had to, pre-Zoom, whatever. Now with currently having 4 legitimate businesses and like partial ownership and passively and like 5 others, so 9 total, but I'm active in 4, I won't have to worry about those 4 when I'm gone for this 3 weeks.
Well, I only had 2 more questions that we hadn't gotten to, and I think you kind of covered them, but I'll tell you what they were. In terms of the control and the planning, my question was going to be, you said you've stopped worrying about the things that you can't control, which is a very healthy thing to do, and focusing on the things that you can control. However, you are a planner and you are somebody that likes to have control over things. And so the question was going to be, is there any context in which you can let go completely? And is that something that's healthy for you as well? It sounds like you have found that is something that is necessary every once in a while, and that you have found a context to do it with your family. And the second question was going to be, do you have a vulnerable side? And it sounds to me like your kids are your vulnerable side. They're the ones who can challenge you to let go.
100%. So, this is not for sale, just FYI, I built this for myself. And this is like details for every day and rating myself and all that type of stuff. So it just kind of gives you a glimpse into just how diligent I am about the planning and everything. Yes, I'll kind of go back to the vulnerability. Yeah, my daughters own me. Everything. I do whatever and not in a way to where they get anything that they want by any means, but the vulnerability is, because I live a public life like you do, it's nice when you can go home and be yourself. Because as authentic as I try to be, in the public facing eye every day of my life, and nowhere near like you and your band or anything like that. But I mean, I'm going into television show right now. I'm getting on major news stations. I've got a book coming out, all that stuff, which I've prepared for. And it is that vulnerability. And it's one of the reasons that I look at Justin Timberlake and Jessica Biel. If you know anything about them, you might even be friends with them. I don't know. But, they spend the majority of their time in Big Sky now. And they've kind of left Hollywood and left that. And they're still active and they work and that type of stuff. But they wanted to raise their kids that way. So for me, when I come here in my home, or most importantly, when I go to Montana as well, we have a lake place south here. But we own 13 homes. And when we go there, it's different. And I like to go places where people don't know me and I don't know them. And a funny story, just kind of going full circle, Andrea, her mom used to be a client. I had a limousine ground transport and did a lot of their stuff. When I went to her concert, our family did her concert, May 6th, which is my youngest daughter's birthday. And she's the one that's the huge Swiftie. We had floor seats. And literally, I've got the shirt on, the jewel shirt. My daughter's got me all done up, all that type of stuff. And 2 people walked up and they recognized me on the floor that were going to the concert, both females. And they asked to take selfies and all that type of stuff. And it made my youngest daughter really upset. And I've never had that experience before. And I apologized to her. I said, I'm sorry. And she's all, well, you could have told him that, you could do that afterwards. And I'm like, and I said, I don't know that I can do that. But I didn't know if that was the right or the wrong answer at that time, to be honest with you. And as I'm sitting there and my job was just to record everything that was going on with her on stage. So I didn't talk to the family for like the next 3 hours and my arms were about ready to fall off. The next morning I walked into my daughter's bedroom upstairs and I said, hey, I told you something last night that I couldn't do that. And I want to talk about that. And really, I want to ask you, how did that make you feel? Because I know you were upset that I don't know if it was because somebody recognized me or if it was that I did the selfie. Can you explain that to me and kind of unpack that so I can understand? And the vulnerable part, as I told her, I just didn't understand. And I think I might have done something wrong to hurt your feelings. There is no chance that I would have had that conversation with my daughter if it was 15 or 20 years ago. So I think that's my vulnerable side, is when I'm uncomfortable. My vulnerable side. I mean, when you live a public life to whatever extent and you have your private life, hopefully that private life is more vulnerable. And like I said earlier, I mean, I am not the man of the house. My wife runs this house and my daughters run this house. And I'm the one that does whatever they tell me. Essentially, I'm the submissive one here. But I think it's probably even different than just with my spouse. It's probably even more with my daughters. And I think a lot of that has to do, I didn't grow up with a father and I didn't grow up with, I don't know how to say it because my mom was awesome, for me. And she put me first and she did everything for me, but we didn't have that intimate relationship. You know what I mean? We didn't hug, we didn't kiss, I didn't get pats on the back if I did well in sports or got a 4.0 or, it was just expected. And I didn't want to be that father, growing up, even though I have super high expectations. And you didn't ask about this, but I'll share one thing as we wrap up. My oldest daughter graduated with 4.18 GPA. She got some great scholarships. It wasn't like, the valedictorian or whatever. I can't even remember what the salutatorian or whatever the second one is. But you know what? My youngest daughter is following in her footsteps from an academic standpoint. They both played like travel soccer, stuff like that. They excelled in things they wanted to do. My wife and I have never, ever had to say one thing to them, not one time, about getting homework done, about, hey, do you have your projects? Are they turned in? Anything like that. And I think for me, as a parent, that's just one level of exuding success and how we lived our life, and that we didn't have to coach them. We didn't have to discipline them. We didn't have to, harp on them to do the things that were important on how we lived our life. And that's something I attribute 100% to my wife and my spouse, of how she has raised those 2 young girls. And I would say that makes me very vulnerable. And I think when I talk about my family and my kids and John Bairden, honestly, because he single-handedly changed my life. And when I got to recognize him, I had about 1,500 people at my second year of my conference, and I cried on stage. And I've never done that before. And it was embarrassing a little bit internally. I didn't say that, but Also, I think it was a great thing for me to be able to go through and do. I'm a pretty emotional guy, even though I'm 6'6", 230 pounds. I'm a big dude. I'm loud. I've got a deep voice, all that type of stuff. And I scare people sometimes, but there is a vulnerable teddy bear, inside the grizzly, if you will. And it's pretty easy for my daughters to bring that out.
That's great.
That's lovely. If you were my therapy client, I'd ask you a lot more questions about your parents and your relationship with them, but you're not, so I won't do that to you.
I'll schedule a paid call after we get done.
There you go.
But that's amazing. That story you told about really being sensitive to your daughter's feelings, like that was just such a nice moment to imagine this big bear of a man becoming a teddy bear and being caring and sensitive and empathic, to bring it full circle.
Well, let me explain one thing to you if I can. So it took my wife pointing out, our youngest daughter, she's the best looking one in the family. She's the most athletic one in the family. She's got straight A's again, just like our oldest daughter does. But the one thing is she has this innate timing for her comedic talent. Almost Jerry Seinfeld-esque, right? So what my wife pointed out to me, because she has this great timing, I rib her or give her shit way more than she can probably handle, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So my wife had to point that out to me. She's like, look, she's 12, 13, now she's 14, and you give her a lot of shit. And if you don't really pay close attention to her body language, some of that can actually hurt her, right? So it took that conversation with my wife to identify that, to make sure, and for me to really endorse or interact with my inner vulnerability, with her, right? So that's something that I just think and she is so shy, so reserved, so type B. She is the polar opposite. So like, it's my oldest daughter got my personality, my youngest daughter got my wife's personality, because me and my wife are very opposite end of the spectrum as well. We don't always see that, you know what I mean? And I think those are things that my wife helps me a lot with, those types of aspects in my life, both professionally, personally, and as a parent.
Bill, tell our listeners where they can find you and your message, talk about your conference and things like that. So if people were interested, they could check out your message.
BillFaeth.com, Bill Faeth. My Instagram handle, if this is on YouTube or something, is down there, BillFaeth73.com. Those are the two easiest places. I own Build Short-Term Rental Wealth. I've got about 35,000 people in a free Facebook group, teach people how to invest in the real estate. Also coach and teach people how to build businesses and build a better life. Like, I've got a couples retreat coming up in Puerto Rico in August, but I don't want to sell anything here. What I will tell you is I do pride myself. I do about 4 to 6 hours a day pro bono work for people to help, just because I want to help people achieve what I've been able to achieve and, become a better person, within their own respect. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. You can be a doctor. You can be an attorney. You can work at the Gap. It doesn't matter. We all have dreams. And the big thing for me is just really helping people try to re-architect their life, because it's been so meaningful for me.
Nice.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your time and being willing to be vulnerable and talk about all these aspects of your life. So, Bill Faeth, thank you so much for being on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Thank you. And to our listeners and viewers, thank you for joining us again on this episode, and we'll see you next week.
Follow that guiding light.